Well, Miranda, good morning, and thank you for joining us a bit early. If it's all right with you, we will keep you on the air for up till 10 o'clock.
Great. Yep, I'm on the East Coast, so it's I have a couple more hours.
Sounds good.
I wish we had a couple more hours. We just lost 15 minutes, very precious minutes, on the show's topic, which I think is crucial. And you have been writing as a researcher at the Revolving Door Project. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that organization, and then let's just go into the meat of the matter. Why are so many of Biden's top cabinet nominee picks either from big business, big corporate interests on the domestic side, and on the foreign policy side? Why do they seem to be so pro-war, pro-Israel, and so militaristic?
Sure thing. And thank you so much for having me on. Pleasure. So yes, I am a researcher with the Revolving Door Project, which is a pretty new organization, and we are basically an executive branch watchdog that seeks to scrutinize political appointees to make sure that they're serving the public interest and not corporate interests. And so, part of my job right now is as we transition to a new administration is looking at the transition and who the Biden team plans to appoint to, over 4,000 positions that he has the power to appoint, and over 1,000 of those are also Senate confirmed. So that's a bit about what I do, and then I can talk through the second part of that question. Which is, why does he seem to be appointing figures from, the private sector? Mm-hmm. And this isn't completely unexpected from our perspective. We've seen people coming in from the revolving door, which is basically a word that we use to describe people moving from the private sector to the public sector, back to the private sector. And we aren't worried about people who maybe worked for a for-profit business 10 years ago. We're worried about executives, lobbyists, consultants that are moving from an industry to an agency that then is regulating that industry. So that's creating a conflict that we're particularly concerned with. And this has happened in both Republican and Democratic administrations. It's kind of been what's done. And Biden has been in Washington for 30 years, and this is kind of what's been done. And we've seen a big pushback to that kind of ever since 2016, with Trump calling to, quote, drain the swamp, even though he has arguably has been probably the worst on appointing revolving door figures. But we've kind of expected this with Biden. And as much as he is appointing people that have come from the corporate sector in some areas so far, we are at least hopeful that he is at least, considering these arguments that we're making and taking ethics requirements more seriously. But yeah, that's kind of like where we're coming from and what the past 30 years has meant for both Democrats and Republicans.
Of those who have been confirmed, and it seems a considerable amount, or those who are ready to be confirmed, are there any flags in particular with respect to particular individuals?
Sure. So I mentioned that we're hopeful with the nominees that Biden has put forward, and of course we'll have to wait to see what happens in Georgia. And if the Democrats are unsuccessful in Georgia, if the Republicans will allow confirmation hearings to move forward. But the nominations so far that have been made, as I mentioned, we're somewhat hopeful. We were happy with the Treasury nomination of Janet Yellen. She's
right.
a labor economist who has not been a revolving door figure. She doesn't have private sector history. And some of the other options that were being floated before then were people that were coming from financial services, the financial services industry, and somebody who was on the board of Google. So we were happy to see that those individuals weren't selected. somebody we are concerned about as we speak about foreign policy is the Secretary of State choice, which is Anthony Blinken. He is a longtime, Democratic policy advisor who worked in the Obama administration and then did what many of these kind of revolving door type figures do, which is leverage their public, their public service experience or their experience in government to, help them in the private sector. So what Tony Blinken did was after he left the Obama administration, he formed it's not technically a lobbying firm, but it's a consulting firm where he, helps consult for various private sector organizations or private sector companies, including, defense contractors. And he's helping them, procure government contracts. And that company is called West Exec Advisors. So he's the founder there. He will obviously take a leave of absence if he is nominated or if he is confirmed. But that's something we're really concerned about, is that deep connection to the defense industry and then leading, the Secretary of State. So those are just a couple examples.
Right. Do you feel, or could you react to the delay in the transition and how that might affect either the selection of appointees or just in general how, when they finally do have their hands on the reins, what that might mean?
Yeah, sure thing. So yeah, obviously the transition has been delayed because Trump's General Services Administration, which is the or General Services Agency, is the agency that officially certifies the results of the election and then helps the Biden transition team connect with the agencies on the ground and helps them kind of evaluate the staffing needs and the biggest policy matters that they'll be facing when they come into government. And just basically helps them get a sense of what they're walking into. And obviously that was delayed this year, both because Trump was challenging the results of the election and also because of the pandemic we're in. We didn't even get the results of the election until days later.
Right.
So that's created an issue, definitely, I think, for the agency review teams, which are teams on the Biden transition team. There are teams for each major department or agency that will go in and assess the needs of each agency. And these teams will be delayed in, assessing and creating these reports. With that being said, the Biden transition team is, we expected them to be much more delayed, but they seem to be moving ahead with their, announcements of their top appointments and nominees. So, with obviously, there's been a huge delay, but they're moving ahead pretty quickly. I think we'll definitely see a delay. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, do you think their appointee for Secretary of State is going to have trouble getting through from the Senate?
That's a good question. I think we will definitely see pushback from Republicans on, we've already seen Republican legislators questioning Tony Blinken and West Exec Advisors and just generally making it clear that they are going to scrutinize Biden's nominees based on their corporate connections. So, right. I can't really speak to what is going to happen, but I think it will definitely come up during hearings. With somebody like Tony Blinken, you can expect to have his corporate sector work really scrutinized. And his company, West Exec Advisors, because it is not technically a lobbying firm, they've been able to kind of skirt those disclosures of their clients. And so I think we can expect to see Republicans pushing and Democrats likely pushing for a release of clients that he's been working for during the confirmation hearing. So yeah, I expect it to get pretty messy.
Miranda Litwak, we have a caller who would like to ask you a question. Caller, if you can hear us, go ahead with your question.
Thank you. I can hear you, and I really appreciate this conversation. It's so important. I wanted to follow up exactly on this point and what you said earlier, Miranda, about the ethics of this. Can you describe the kind of ethics statements or conflict of interest statements that the appointees might be signing, and are they going to release those? What kind of transparency do you think there'll be from the Biden campaign administration on releasing those conflict of interest statements so they can be scrutinized? And particularly then on someone who should be just, on that front just fine, someone like Neera Tanden, who seems to be attacked from the other side. So I just wonder if you could discuss that. And then secondly, in your articles, you talk about ways to bypass the Senate should the Georgia race go in favor of the Republicans. I wonder if you could also discuss that point. But the ethics and the transparency of the conflict of interest statements would be really helpful to hear. Thank you.
Definitely,
Thank you,
yeah,
caller.
those are great questions. Great questions. I'll start with the first one, which I will say, the Biden transition team had to release an ethics requirements for their staff, and we'll expect to see further ethics requirements once he's inaugurated. And with those ethics requirements, we, Revolving Door Project is hoping to see stricter requirements. Basically, the requirement said, banned lobbyists from working on the transition team, would make exceptions, and those exceptions could be granted by the general counsel of the transition team. And that general counsel is Jessica Hertz, who was formerly a regulatory counsel at Facebook. So obviously there were concerns there about the fact that, a corporate lawyer was able to grant exceptions to those ethics rules. So that's something we're going to be pushing for, is that those exceptions and those loopholes are closed. Additionally, we see that Biden's close advisor, Steve Ricchetti, has been appointed to a senior level position in the White House. And so we're expecting that any ethics rules will have in exceptions for somebody like Steve Ricchetti, who is a lobbyist, or who was a registered lobbyist and had its own lobbying firm. With that being said, we are pushing the Biden team to adopt very strict ethics rules, and we have drafted executive orders to, make sure that the Biden administration is following those rules. But like I said, because there are already individuals that that our ideal ethics rules wouldn't really cover, we're expecting it not to be as robust as the ones we're proposing. As for Neera Tanden, so this is another case where we're hopeful. Neera Tanden isn't like the biggest progressive that a lot of the groups on the left were hoping to see, and she's also deeply allied with Hillary Clinton. So there's obviously some tension from Sanders supporters, but I think ultimately the Neera Tanden appointment or nomination to lead the Office of Management and Budget is another reason that we're hopeful, because of the other options that were being floated for this position. So we were hearing that somebody like Bruce Reed, who is a longtime Biden advisor, was being considered for this role. And Bruce Reed is, a proud deficit hawk, somebody who wants to cut Social Security and the Social Safety Net and Medicare. And so we were really pushing to make sure that somebody who is running the president's budget and the budget for the entire executive branch is not somebody who is in favor of cutting budgets and stripping back the social safety net. So Neera Tanden definitely won't be that type of person. So we're encouraged by that.
Yeah, we'll get back to those the possibility of Social Security cuts in a second. I'd like to continue to focus on the pro-war cabinet for a moment. I did some research today. We have very good connections with the Senator Feinstein's office. And we've had interns for the show actually intern for the senator. And of course, Feinstein chaired the Senate Intelligence Committee for many years. There were two picks, two Biden picks that concern me. And they're kind of like under the radar. One is Jake Sullivan. He's expected to be nominated to be the National Security Advisor. Currently, he's with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and which is a bit of an oxymoron, because peace in this case is being funded by 10 military agencies and weapons contractors. And he's also with Marco Advisory Partners, which is a strategic consultancy firm run by former British spy chiefs. So that's one nominee that troubles me. The other one is Avril Haines, who is a top contender for the CIA director or the director of national intelligence, the Center for New American Security, and the Brookings Institute. He's he's there. He's with West Exec, and he's also with a very secretive and potentially very subversive company that just had its initial public offering, Palantir Technologies, which is a controversial CIA-funded, NSA-linked data mining firm. It comes from In-Q-Tel, which is the CIA's venture capital firm, and we've done shows on In-Q-Tel in the past. So here we have two probable nominees: Avril Haines, who is with Palantir Technologies, the Center for New American Security, and the Brookings Institute, and Jake Sullivan, who's with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, but maybe not so peaceful, and Marco Advisory Partners. Again, these are two war hawks. These are two people who pander to the defense industry, and these are just two of the probable nominees in a pro-war cabinet. As it looks like, we may be headed down the path for some kind of escalation with Iran. Do you care to comment?
Yeah, definitely. Those are two other nominees that I'm particularly worried about, and I think you had it completely correct. Jake Sullivan worked for one of these, quote, strategic consultancy firms, which is similar to Tony Blinken's West Exec. They're basically advisory firms that are able to avoid the categorization of lobbying, so that they avoid basically disclosing what they're lobbying and who their clients are. And it's basically a technicality. They're not technically speaking on behalf of their clients to legislators or people in government themselves, but they're giving their clients the same types of advice. And so we call it shadow lobbying. And Jake Sullivan, revolved out of government when he served in the Obama administration and went to Macro Advisory Partners, where we don't know much about his work, but we do know he was working for Uber, and we can assume he's working for other corporate clients. And I think it's extremely concerning that he will be one of our top national security officials. As for Avril Haines, same thing with her. She was actually a senior advisor at West Exec, which is Tony Blinken's consultancy, and so that's another executive from West Exec that is represented in government now. And she also, as you mentioned, consulted for Palantir, which is extremely worrying. Palantir is obviously Peter Thiel's company, and you kind of described it. Peter Thiel is obviously a huge Trump supporter and Trump backer. And so I think it's extremely problematic. We do research. As I mentioned, we're scrutinizing these nominees and we're looking into their corporate connections and their connections to industry, particularly the defense industry. And when we discovered that Avril Haines was consulting for Palantir, she had it listed on her bio at the Brookings Institute, and a few days later, she had removed it. So these are people that are trying to hide these connections, right, or trying to minimize them, and that's a huge concern of mine, at least, especially with people at consultancy firms where they aren't required to disclose their clients, and so we can't really know the extent to which they're connected with the defense industry.
If you've just joined the program, it's 35 minutes past the hour. This is Heroes and Patriots with John Sakowicz and Mary Massey. Today we are speaking with Miranda Litwak. She is a researcher at the Revolving Door, and we are discussing her most recent article published by The Guardian on Joe Biden's cabinet picks and what his cabinet picks might mean for the rest of us. If you would like to ask a question of Ms. Litwak, we would ask you to call 707-923-3911 or email your questions to heroesandpatriots@gmail.com. John, you had another question?
Yes, certainly. So let's come back to Biden's likely nominee for to direct the Office of Budget Management, Neera Tanden, and how she has in the past called for cuts to Social Security, saying that we need to put entitlements on the table as well as taxes. And that's a direct quote. Many of our listeners are on Social Security. either as retired people or on disability income. And, this is deeply troubling. Social Security should be one of those sacrosanct programs that define us as Americans, define us as compassionate, define us as people who care passionately about the security and stability of our most at-risk populations. Would you care to comment a little bit about how this nominee is a real threat to those programs?
Yeah, so, as I mentioned in response to the previous question, she was not our ideal candidate. I don't think she's somebody who is going to be championing, strong investment or the type of investment that we're looking for. But she is, like I mentioned, of the options that were on the table, we were happy with the fact that certain other proud deficit hawks did not get the position. And I'll say, the Revolving Door Project is in the kind of, our main focus is scrutinizing these potential appointees instead of offering our own positive names that we think are the ideal candidate. So, coming from a place where I'm not really, it isn't really my area to promote individuals I would love to see at OMB. There were individuals I was extremely concerned about, somebody like Bruce, who I mentioned, who is loud and proud about his desire to cut Social Security and Medicare for all, whereas Neera Tandon is, as you said, she's made questionable comments about cutting Social Security, which should absolutely be unacceptable, but I think she is also more open to being pushed by the left and by people who are, strong supporters of Social Security and Medicare and other social safety net programs. And so she's somebody that will be more amenable to that political pressure, whereas, others like Bruce Reed would not be and are very happy to kind of admit that they are openly in support of, cutting budgets and budget deficit and being a deficit hawk generally. So that's kind of my take there. But of course, there are issues with Neera Tandon, and our goal is to continue putting pressure on Biden appointees that we don't think are perfect, to make sure that they are, responsive to the left's demands and supporting extremely important programs like Social Security.
Yeah, in preparing for the show, we spoke to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, which is a think tank that we often consult with. And one of the things that they mentioned is that the chain CPI, which is how they determine your inflation-adjusted increases in Social Security at the every year, they actually suggested that this new nominee would use the chain CPI to reduce benefits by about 2% on average, which again is just appalling. During these times of great economic hardship, during this time of a wave of personal and corporate bankruptcies due to this pandemic, it's just unconscionable. It's just un-American that Social Security benefits would be cut going into 2021.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's super interesting to hear from CBPP, which is a great organization. And I think we need to ensure that Biden is not allowing anybody in his administration to cut benefits during this truly unprecedented time. So I think we need to keep up the pressure. So in my article, I kind of spoke about the possibility of if we lose in Georgia in the runoff, we have two runoffs, we'll face obviously a Republican majority, which we've seen McConnell use every tool in the toolbox to basically block Democratic policy agenda. We can kind of expect the same with Biden nominees. And if that happens, and if McConnell shows that he is going to basically block nominees and therefore block the functioning of the executive branch, I and my colleague in our article argue that Biden should kind of push back. And there are a couple of options that he can use to put in kind of temporary appointees to run major agencies in the case that McConnell blocks his nominees. And obviously these are two options that are not ideal. What would be ideal is if McConnell would give Biden's nominees fair confirmation hearings. But if he doesn't, there are two other options. And the first option is a power provided to the president by Congress, and it's in the Vacancies Act. And the Vacancies Act allows the president to appoint acting officials to lead agencies if, for example, somebody steps down suddenly, there's a death, or if, for whatever reason, the Senate is obstructing, confirmation hearings. And so we've seen this be used in past administrations. For example, in the Trump administration, one could argue that he abused this power and appointed acting nominees to run agencies where he didn't want to have confirmation or put his nominees in a place where they'd be scrutinized. But we're arguing that if a McConnell-controlled Senate slow walks these confirmation hearings, Biden should push back just as hard and say, okay, if you are going to block this, we have another option. We can put in acting officials to make sure our government's running and doing the job and providing, extremely important and vital services to the American public through this other tool.
I've got a question about something that is very late breaking news. Trump is now trying to change civil service laws that would allow him to fire many Obama-era, not appointees, but civil servants. So he's trying to purge progressives who are federal employees on one hand. On the other hand, many Trump appointees are now trying to burrow into the civil service jobs to where they could possibly sabotage a Biden agenda. So on one hand, he's purging progressives who are civil service employees. On the other hand, a lot of Trump supporters are burrowing into the civil service bureaucracy with the potential for sabotaging the Biden agenda. Do you care about this late breaking development? Care to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely troubling. And we've seen this from Trump over his term, is this attack on civil servants, experts, nonpartisan experts who staff these agencies over years for both Democratic and Republican presidents. And it's truly, really shocking to see this undermining of these nonpartisan civil servants. And this other aspect you mentioned, which is the burrowing, which is basically making your political appointees civil servants so that they can't be removed by the next administration. So it's this effort to both undermine and then also politicize the civil servants. Right. The civil service, which the whole point of the civil service is that they are experts and they are nonpartisan. And this is really, really shocking. And you were exactly right to bring it up, and I'm going to be closely watching it. So yeah, extremely important and extremely worrying. Developing recently, which goes to national security, is obviously the delay in the transition puts our country at risk with respect to national security. But then, pardon Michael T. Flynn is now saying that we should redo the election under military supervision, and has made some other outlandish remarks that, Biden has got to at least know is in his peripheral vision that this is going on as an aside. Could you comment on that aspect that has developed in the last, 2 days or so?
Right. Really bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, nothing ceases to surprise me anymore with Trump. I swear to God, every time I think it's over and we won and I hope I can stop listening to this, there are new stories of just madness. Including his efforts to potentially pardon his own children and personal lawyer. So, it's just absolutely outrageous. And, we've been dealing with this for the past 2 years, just a complete attack on our democratic values and systems and processes, and just, I mean, undermining the election is truly horrific. I don't think there's any weight behind any of these allegations or efforts by Trump, and we've even seen, in the past few days, Pence begin to distance himself from Trump. So for now, I'm watching and reading about these issues, even though they cause me mental stress. But I don't think that there's any merit in them.
Well, I just hope that Biden's appointees, are going to be able to not only stand up to this, but to allay fears to us as a country about our national security and our foreign allies.
Definitely, I agree. And I think part of the job of the Biden administration will be to really hold Trump officials accountable who broke laws and who put our national security at risk, and get us back on track, and make sure that we're protected from foreign influence in the future. I completely agree that that's going to be a huge part of what Biden officials need to be doing in their first months in office.
We've got 10 more minutes with a really wonderful guest, and we will have you back, Miranda. Our call-in number is 707-923-3911. I repeat, 707-923-3911. I've been taking a look at some of the things that you've written, and you say that there are as many as 277 bipartisan actions that are popular with both wings of the Republican and Democratic parties, which Biden could take on day one of his administration. Do you care to enumerate some of those bipartisan actions that would benefit the country as a whole and which would have the support of both parties?
Definitely. I don't know that they would have complete bipartisan support, but yes, there are 277 policies that we found, that our researchers found in based on the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force proposals. So earlier this summer, there were several policy experts that put out recommendations to the Biden team, which he did not actually adopt all of those policy proposals, but within them there are several proposals that can be enacted by just the executive branch. And this is something that Revolving Door Project looks at closely, because we're very focused on the executive branch, but also because there's a chance that we will not, win control of the Senate. And even if we do, we have some kind of moderate stalwarts in office, like Senator Joe Manchin, Senator Kyrsten Sinema, that might not vote on party lines if we, put up our legislative agenda. So there are ways that Biden can and should use the executive branch to enact his policy proposals. One I discussed in the Guardian piece was the Treasury has the ability to tackle climate change itself without needing to pass a Green New Deal or any legislative proposals. The Dodd-Frank Act, which was enacted after the 2008 financial crisis, gives Treasury the power to assess certain, basically the financial stability of the economy. And it can direct federal regulators to force financial services, the financial services industry, to consider climate in its investing portfolio, and even potentially have them divest from the fossil fuel industry, which is a really important tool that hasn't been utilized by past administrations yet since the passing of the Dodd-Frank Act. So that's one example of a policy, of a way that Biden can tackle climate change without the use of Congress. And I'm happy to go through more, but as you said, there's 277, and I know we only have 5 minutes left.
How about fighting the pandemic and getting the vaccine out? What executive actions can the new president take?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be huge. From, basically Biden will have control of the CDC. We're talking about civil servants. We'll talk about Tony Fauci, who is like the ultimate civil servant. Making sure we are, promoting public safety, making sure, we are getting the vaccines out to the people that most need them. There's a ton of, and also, the Department of Health and Human Services, which is going to be kind of like at the center of all of this action, they have incredible power to help fight the pandemic. And speaking of HHS, we're particularly worried about who might end up at the head of HHS. We're hearing Gina Raimondo, who I spoke about in my article, who is a former venture capitalist, who has, cut pension funds and Medicare in her home state of Rhode Island. So that's something to definitely be looking at. But yeah, there's going to be a ton, and I think we need to look closely at who ends up leading HHS to kind of give us a sense of how aggressive they'll use those powers to make sure we're fighting the pandemic.
Miranda, we want to save the last minute for you to tell us more about your organization and how our listeners can support it. So we have time for just one more question before you get to talk about your group, Revolving Door. I'd like to know, I'm a New York native, and New York City's going broke. There's an exodus of people. There are lots of commercial real estate vacancies. People are working from home. Tax revenues are falling. The city is closed for business. What executive actions can President Biden make to aid struggling cities in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's somewhere that Trump has really failed. We passed a huge stimulus bill earlier this year with money put aside that could have been used to help states and municipalities that are suffering under huge budget shortfalls. And we saw this particularly with the Fed, which is Republican controlled. The Fed created several credit facilities to help support and backstop the corporate sector, and only created one to backstop and support state and local governments. And they could have put way more resources into supporting state and local governments, including, lowering interest rates so that state and local governments could borrow more cheaply. There were ways that we could have gotten money to a place like New York City or other struggling states and local governments that we just failed to do. And so it's going to be really important for our Fed to make a way stronger effort, the effort that they're already making for the corporate sector to support, small businesses and state and local governments.
And again, tell our listeners about Revolving Door and how they might reach you.
Definitely. Yes, please come check out our website, which is therevolvingdoorproject.org. You can read a bunch of our work and just kind of follow along. We also have a bunch of great tools if you're interested in learning more about corporate influence on the executive branch. And then also you can follow us on Twitter at Revolving Door DC. And yeah, we'd love to have you all follow us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Miranda. Happy holidays to you and yours.
And we look forward to having you back. You get the Good Citizen. You get the Good Citizen of the Week award project from us.
Well, thank you so much. It was really such a pleasure.
Thank you. This has been Heroes and Patriots, the December show, and I would like to add that we keep all of those who will not have someone at their table this holiday season due to the COVID pandemic. It's a tough season for many of us. And the other thing I'd like to say is KMUD has been around for many, many years, and we hope that you will have a little left over to give to them this holiday season for all the work they do 365 days a year. John?
What am I holding in my hand, Mary?
He's holding his checkbook.
I'm holding my checkbook, and I'm writing my membership check out to KMUD right now. Please support this community station. It's your station.
Thank you, and happy holidays.